questions, or if you wish, you can ask a question by putting your hand up as usual. Please ensure that during the duration of the event, you're muted and your camera is turned off. And we will be having a general Q&A at the end of the webinar anyway. So, over to Dr. Frank Levine of Blue Link Worldwide. Frank.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a very gracious and generous introduction and kind words, and for setting the stage so nicely. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Frank Levine. I run the Blue Link Worldwide practice, and today is all about looking at US expansion. Of course, Nick touched on exports as being a critical building block in setting an organization in readiness for an investment in due course. But with the focus of my presentation will be more around how you actually establish a presence in the United States and establish a basis for a US expansion. But all in all, the important message running central to all of this is do work with the experts, do profit from the expert knowledge around this table, and others who may come across your path. I'll be more than happy to facilitate introductions as we go along. But next slide, please, be very kind. So what I've tried to do here is, for those who would like us to stay with you throughout the journey, the investment journey, is a project management approach which identifies a dozen or so important elements of looking to set up in the States, from having a good project management level of expertise deployed to the expansion effort, having an entry plan, paying attention to legal imperatives, evaluating the locations, and so on. There's about a dozen of them. None of these are not necessarily exhaustive, but these are the sorts of elements that you should be having in your mind's eye when you're looking to expand into the States. And indeed, the experts around the table today, many of them can handle all, if not many of these competencies one by one in a very thorough and robust and professional way. And we're here to help you too in making the connections and staying with you, as it says in the footnote, throughout your investment journey, as much as you care for us to be so. Next slide, please. A little bit about me. I have an office in Hampshire, but also we have a presence in Jacksonville in Florida, another office there. And the four primary services are helping companies with the 12-step US expansion project planning, cross-border investment, event management. Hope you find the right economic development party to work with, and there's a wonderful one with us today under the umbrella of Michael Henderson. We'll be talking in a moment about Pittsburgh, and some consultants and advisors as well. I won't belabor some of the detail in the slide. It's a bit more than I'd care to do so, but it'll be in the pack at the end of the presentation for those who want to see a little bit more about how this all works at the practical level. Next slide, please. So what about it? What are we talking about in terms of the facts? What are the facts if you're looking to expand in the United States? Let's look at them in terms of like a big roadmap that I'm trying to lay out for you here. Next slide, please. First one is to avoid stereotypes. This may be an amusing character, but the United States is a very nuanced marketplace. A lot of cultural diversity, and the regions are different, as indeed the states from one another. So do beware not to fall into the trap of trying to stereotype or generalize about what it's like culturally, and to be successful and effective in building good, trusting relationships with our North American friends. Next slide, please. It is a very large market, over 20 trillion GDP. Very much open for doing business. Do beware of the Buy America policy. We can talk about that offline a bit more, but it's something to bear in mind. And again, if you have a presence in the States, you're likely to overcome this more readily than trying to export and build your business on export basis only. UK is by far the leader in investing in the States. Over 1 million Americans work for British companies. Next slide, please. Just the sheer size of it. I mean, nearly 400 million people, just under 10 million square miles. It's the sheer size of the States, which lends itself to the next step in the conversation, which is look at it from a regional perspective. Next slide, please. As you can see, Oregon is as big as the UK in terms of land mass, with only 4 million people. We have close to 70 million, and the UK would if it was dropped into the bucket in the United States, you wouldn't see the splash. It's quite a small market size, but a very dense population. And you can see the United States is massive in comparison to the UK in terms of land mass and population size. Next slide, please. As I alluded to a moment ago, you need to think regional because that's the only way you can really get your arms around it. And the West Coast is quite different from the South, as indeed the Southwest again is different from the Midwest and the New England states. So do think regional and again, be nuanced in your approach in building an entry strategy that takes into on board the different differences of the different states. And I'm sure Mike Henderson will be touching on why, in this regard with Pittsburgh in a short while, which will be very interesting to see. He's got a wonderful presentation about to come through the presentation of this event. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, each state has its own is to be seen almost as a separate country. Has its own state government, its own constitution. It's further divided into counties that have their own laws and regulations. So you need to pay attention to the detail and be, as I mentioned before, nuanced in your approach to looking at the states. But if you are looking to establish a presence and you've taken all this into account, you need to have a top of mind the ability to access a talent pool. The supply chain is close by. Your ease of access getting in and out of the states, and you have a competitive advantage in that particular location when you do land on a location to establish your presence. Next slide, please. These are the most favored cities that are come top of mind all the time. But again, we're looking at Miami at the moment, but in Florida. But there are some other great places in the state. Indeed, we can see Philadelphia to the northeast, running up the corridor of the I-95, which we'll touch on in a moment, the importance of that corridor. But not far behind and to the adjacent is Pittsburgh, which I'm sure Mike will touch on in a moment. But the second level cities are worth really looking at. They're not the second best, but they're just as interesting and wonderful places to work and live. But you'll find the costs of living there much more reasonable and not so expensive in hiring staff or finding a location to office your business. Next slide, please. I touched on the I-95. I'm very familiar with that. I have a home smack on the edge of it, on the butt of the Georgia border of northeast Florida. And this is where Jacksonville's based, but it's a pretty important market in its own right. 37% of the US GDP is within the 200 miles of the eastern seaboard, and Pittsburgh is very much in the mix there in terms of important city and center for commerce and trade. And it's third largest economy in its own right, just taking the I-95 that runs up the eastern seaboard of the United States. So you don't necessarily need to go so far west if you're inclined. Much can be done. We're just focusing on that which is close to the UK in terms of logistics and travel ease, getting in and out of the States. Next slide, please. These are the economic hotspots, and I won't belabor them again. But if you're in any of these industries, this is where a lot of the energy is currently being expanded in the States. Not that this is exhaustive, but these are the sorts of verticals or sectors that are very buoyant and dynamic and growing fast in the US. And if you're in these businesses in the United Kingdom, take a serious look at investing in the States if you're in these sectors, because they are very dynamic and growing at a pace. Next slide, please. The unions are a feature of life as they are in the United Kingdom, but just to show that the level of unionization is relatively low in the States, and you can see that those that are with 20% or more in a darker blue. Next slide, please. Just a further element of nuancing here is the right to work, which is means effectively the unions are not necessarily enforced as a form of a labor organization, but in the other states where you've got forced unionization, which is in the brown, it's something to be aware of. It's not a showstopper, but just the unions are a feature of business life and need to be respectfully appreciated. Next slide, please. If you're looking to make an entry in the States and as you do your homework and so forth, these are some of the classic routes to market. Obviously, social media is very important. Agents, distributors, establishing your own office with your own staff, contract sales consultant, having a joint venture with a strategic alliance with a US partner is going to be an important possibility for many. Acquiring something to get off the ground and to getting critical mass. E-commerce is very important too. These are some of the entry options available that need to be considered when you're building your entry plan, and they're very valid in this context. Next slide, please. Now, Kathy will be talking about the melting pot of culture and language a bit more. I don't want to steal her thunder, but it is a diverse marketplace, diverse culture. The North and the South are quite different from other regions around the USA. Language is important, interpretation of language, your business attire, how you look and come across. All these are nuances that need to be taken into account if you're looking to establish a presence in the States. And worth investing time and energy getting across them. Next slide, please. In a practical sense, appearing American is important when you're actually doing business in the States. Price in invoice in dollars, the paper size is different, business cards are different, metric versus imperial. Have a business address which is US based is optimal. Have a US telephone number. Domains are crucial. Don't rely on co.uk, go to .com. And you may want to consider an inventory fulfillment house to build momentum in the States as an option for building traction. Next slide, please. Coming to the end, I don't want to belabor this because I know that David Patton will be talking about tax, but next is an important consideration: how you create it and when you create it, and what are the ways of getting to the States without necessarily having a visa or creating nexus. I'm sure that Trelli and Associates will also be touching on this in a moment as well when we get to their point in the staging of this presentation. Next slide, please. I think that's me done. We try and position you for success. All my materials are available for review. I'll be delighted to talk to you again. But again, the central mantra is to work with the experts around the table and others that you may care to come across. Don't try and do it without expert advice. It is complicated, but it's not too complex to be a very successful venture for the company. It's such a big market and an important one too. So without more ado, I'd like to hand over to Mike Henderson. Mike, it's delighted to be with you. This is our first time we've been working together, and thank you very much for making the time to join us. The floor is yours, sir. Mike, please carry on.
Very good. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. The reason I'm on here, Pittsburgh has had a sister city relationship with Sheffield since 1980, so we have a connection there. And our organization, Pittsburgh Regional Alliance, we work with companies that are looking to invest in the 10-county region that we cover. Could be opening a new office, a manufacturing facility, whatever, and we kind of help make connections, find real estate, and so on. So I'll give you a little bit of overview of what's going on in the Pittsburgh region. So next slide, please. So we cover 10 counties, as I said, 2.6 million people in our region. We like to say that we have East Coast amenities at a Midwest price. We're close to the East Coast. Frank showed the I-95 corridor. We're a little further west of that. But our pricing, our cost of living, cost of business, cost of real estate is lower than what you'll find in the East Coast. And we're at the nexus of industrial and tech innovation. We still have a lot of heavy industry, but we have a lot of tech that's working to kind of help automate that industry. Next, please. So where are we? We are about, Pittsburgh is about 370 miles west of New York. We're within 500 miles of almost half the US and Canadian population. We have a large airport here that's got nonstop service to London on British Airways. It started at 4 days a week. It's gone to 6 days a week. And now starting in the summer, it'll be 7 days a week. So we're going to have a daily nonstop from London Heathrow, which is a great service to have. The airport is undergoing a huge industrial or modernization project right now. It should be done next year. And it's an airport that's entirely powered by its own microgrid using natural gas and solar field on the airport itself. So it's a really interesting airport. Next slide, please. So thriving industries, 60 or 70 years ago, it probably would have just had steel as the basic industry here. This was the steel center for the world. We still do have some steel, but that industry took a downturn in the 70s and 80s. But now we've been able to diversify into a whole lot of other different sectors. We have life sciences and healthcare has always been big because of our University of Pittsburgh. We have robotics and AI, which are big now because of Carnegie Mellon University. We have an energy cluster because we're on top of a natural gas field, a huge natural gas field. And we have a lot of companies that are also doing now clean tech and finding new ways to generate energy and to use that energy. And we also now have a space cluster. So Astrobotic, which just was in the news not too long ago. They attempted to put a new lander on the moon. They have another lander for the moon coming up and one for Mars coming up. So we have now a space cluster. So we've really diversified from steel into a lot of different types of sectors now. Next, please. So one of the sectors I mentioned, robotics and artificial intelligence. We have more than 140 robotics companies with employing over 7,000 people. We have 20 academic and private research centers on robotics. We have a robotics network that kind of coordinates and gets those companies together. And a year or two ago, we got a Build Back Better grant, which is helping small and medium-sized companies to automate their processes by using robotics or other types of automation. And AI is becoming a much more important part of our sector, of our industry sector here. We also have a lot of autonomous vehicles that are being developed and tested here. Aurora, Stack AV, Motional. You can see those cars being tested on the streets here, and they're all working to improve the systems for autonomous vehicles. Next slide. You can see some of the companies, the tech companies that are here. They're in several different neighborhoods. These are all within the city of Pittsburgh, so they're all within like about 20, 30 minutes of each other. But we have sectors in downtown, we have on the North Shore, we have what we call Robotics Row, which is in the Strip District. You can drive up and down, you can see all the robotic companies' names. We have a cluster in Oakland, which is where the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University are based. We have an East Liberty area, which is where Google opened their big office, and that's attracted other companies to the area like Duolingo. So we have several different locations in sub neighborhoods in the region here and in the city where a lot of tech companies have set up base. Next, please. So life sciences and healthcare has always been big. We have two big world-class hospital systems, Allegheny Health Network and UPMC. A lot of this has come out of the University of Pittsburgh, which was where the polio vaccine was invented and discovered. We have more, oh, sorry, go back a second. There we go. Almost 6,000 life sciences and healthcare establishments. There's a lot of life sciences research going on here. A lot of that's in the universities, which I'll talk about in a minute. But we have a lot of companies here that are doing, especially on the medical devices and the clinical trials sector. That's where we specialize in healthcare here. Next, please. Advanced manufacturing, we have almost 3,000 manufacturing establishments, 86,000 people employed in manufacturing still. So we are still a big manufacturing sector, a center. So we have over 50 global manufacturers have their world headquarters here. And we actually have a whole neighborhood 91, which is on the airport itself. It's an end-to-end additive manufacturing campus. So you can get your gas there, you can make your products, you can have them inspected, finalized, polished, shipped out, all in one little neighborhood on the airport. Next, please. And these are just some of the names, the companies. A lot of them you'll recognize very quickly. These are companies that are in machinery, chemicals, batteries, metals, transportation equipment. A lot of these are either based here or have a major facility here. You know, some of the companies are brand new. Form Energy has they're a battery manufacturer, and EOS are both battery manufacturers. That's kind of a new subsector that we've established here in the last couple of years. So that sector has also been growing. So it's not just the heavy industry, it's this new technologies that we're looking to develop here. Next, please. Energy, we are on top of the Marcellus and Utica shale fields, so there's a lot of gas extraction going on, but there's also gas transmission. There's companies using the gas here. There's companies generating energy here. We're taking some of the old coal power plants, closing them down and redeveloping the properties. So the electric infrastructure is still here, but you can still you can find a large plot of land if you need it. So there's a lot of energy companies here. Over 33,000 people work in the energy sector here. Next, please. So we have 79 universities and post-secondary institutions in our 10-county region. So that includes universities, colleges, community colleges, technical schools, trade schools, and they all develop the workforce that companies here need, and then export those students around the world. About over 130,000 students are enrolled in these schools, and about 45,000 of them annually graduate. So it's a large talent pool that's based here in the Pittsburgh region. Next, please. So I mentioned two of our big universities, Carnegie Mellon University and University of Pittsburgh. They're both tier 1 research universities. Most cities don't have even one. We have two of them. They're basically across the street from each other. The foreground of this picture is Carnegie Mellon University. In the background with the tall building and cathedral learning, that's the University of Pittsburgh. But they have different sectors that they concentrate on. Carnegie Mellon is more of a technology and innovation school. That's where artificial intelligence was birthed. #1 artificial intelligence and computer science schools programs. And the University of Pittsburgh is heavily into life sciences. So they're the third school nationally in terms of U.S. government National Institutes of Health funding. They do a lot of manufacturing. There's opening a building right now, a biomanufacturing facility here to manufacture different types of drugs and materials. So these two universities work together, and they've helped spin off a lot of other companies, a lot of companies that are working on robotics or medical devices and things. So these are really great universities to have here, especially for their research capabilities. Next, please. In terms of research, we have a number of research centers, and they're concentrated on things like robotics, life sciences, medical devices, transplants, energy innovation. We have a National Energy Technology Laboratory here that's run by the Department of Energy. So a lot of research that's going on into the region here. Next, please. And I mentioned the affordability. We're named the #1 most affordable city for housing in 2023. Our median home sale price is about a quarter of the cost of San Francisco, half the cost of Boston. Median apartment rents are about $1,000 a month. And you can be in urban areas, you can be in suburban, you can be in rural, all within our 10-county region. Next, please. So that's my presentation. We are, as I mentioned, our organization is here to help. If you're interested in doing something in Pittsburgh region, we provide help with information and data. We can help find real estate. We can make connections with universities, law firms, banks, and so on, whatever needs to be done. So happy to help out if anybody needs information about Pittsburgh. So thank you very much for having me, and turn it over to Frank.
Okay.
You're on mute.
Right, I'll jump in there. Thank you very much for that, Mike. That was really interesting, and I might spring back to a couple of points you made there during my presentation. I'm Kathy Branson. I'm the Managing Director of Dialogue. I'd like to thank you first of all, Nick and Frank, for inviting me to speak today on all things cultural. We have been going at Dialogue for 30 years now in the kind of language industry. I myself am a linguist, I'm a language trainer, and I've lived and worked in 5 different countries globally. So I kind of have some experience firsthand of trying to integrate into different cultures. Quite a bit of experience dealing in and with the US. And our company's been providing cultural language training and translations to help our clients export successfully, relocate staff, and complete successful acquisitions globally, US included, for, as I said, about 30 years now. We are active globally, although we're based in the UK, with about 20% of our sales coming from North America now. I'll just go on. I'm going to share a few things today. First of all, why does culture matter? So we have a little look at the significance for potentially your businesses moving and expanding across the US. I thought I'd share a little bit about our story, how we made it into the US and some of the difficulties and challenges we had as a UK company. And then looking at just a few tips, again, not to overgeneralize, but thinking about differences in approaches to negotiations, leadership, and marketing. Okay. So first of all, why culture matters. I think the key thing to say here, first of all, is that we can see we've got a big mix of industries. Thank you to everyone who's attending today. We've got men's hair products all the way through to eczema treatment remedies, I can see. So a good diversity of industries interested in expanding across the US. You'll all be looking into tax and legal implications for export, but culture is often an area that is considered for kind of one of the soft skills, soft areas, and can be overlooked. You may yourself have been dealing with many different parts of the US and may be well versed already, but there may be some areas you haven't considered, so we'll touch on some of those now. First of all, so just finessing success there. How many deals, and ask yourself this in your own companies, have gone wrong for you within the first few seconds of a meeting? I can think off the top of my head of at least 5 deals that could have gone northwards rather than southwards if I'd done my research better. Getting those first impressions right, the initial greeting, appropriate physical contact, terms of address, conversation topics. How do you accept a business card? It may all seem quite common sense, but getting that right is absolutely key to getting that deal signed. And get it wrong in the first few seconds, you could have lost business. Secondly, it can be the difference between market entry failure or success, quite simply. Research indicates that many companies entering foreign markets without a deep understanding of local cultures often face challenges, and in many cases have to withdraw from the market. Ineffective communication may lead to failed negotiations, very often happens, and difficulties in building relationships with local partners and customers. There are many examples of this, and I'll touch on one later on, but brand damage is a big issue. Insensitivity to cultural norms and not doing your homework can lead to disaster. And then finally, thinking about team productivity in multicultural work environments, misunderstandings and tensions between employees from different cultural backgrounds can reduce productivity, decrease turnover, and lead to loss of valuable talent. So it does matter. I'm here today to help you think about how you can avoid potentially a US car crash. And to help you navigate clearly throughout the diversity of the US market. I thought it may be helpful just to share some of the experiences we had when we first went into the US market 20 years ago. We are currently successful there. As I said, about 20% of our sales currently comes from North America, but it wasn't always the case. Around 20 years ago, we had the opportunity to go for a US consultancy contract. We were already in Germany and France and thought, well, there's no language barrier. Let's just go for it. How could we possibly go wrong? But we made so many mistakes, believe me. We went back and forth. In the end, we lost out to a US competitor and really, really regretted that. However, we didn't give up. We sat down and kind of thought, well, okay, what have we learned from this, and how can we kind of improve going forwards? So a couple of things I think I would say that we should have done differently is our approach to negotiations, which is what I want to touch on as well. Simply that we should have been bolder and clearer. As typical Brits, we were very self-deprecating, way too modest in our approach to negotiations, too tentative around pricing, and quite simply, we'd have had much more success had we tackled it all head on and confidently. Value proposition is another area which we reviewed after our initial experience in North America. The value proposition we were putting to Germany, to France, was very different to what we should have been putting to the various offices across North America we were pitching to. We should have been focusing much more on customer service, being flexible, being available 24/7, as opposed to focusing too much on price and quality. So that's a key one to get right, and do your research in your marketing. And I think, Frank's touched on this. We've just had a fantastic presentation from Mike on Pittsburgh. Be wary of regional differences. It sounds like an obvious thing, but treat every state very, very differently. And negotiating will be very, very different. We were negotiating across offices across North America. And had we done more research, we would have approached every single meeting, every single negotiation differently. And finally, I just wish that we had got advice at the time. After that experience, we hired a consultant who specialized in US culture, who trained us, who coached us in negotiations. And suffice to say that next time around, we got the deal, and it was worth over £1 million to us. So we haven't looked back since. So that's kind of where we kind of came into the market, and could have done a lot better. Moving on from that, I think 3 core areas that I would encourage you to look at is your approach to negotiations and meetings, whichever state or states you're going into. Within this area, building rapport, and I want to stress here, it's very important not to overgeneralize, but I think one key thing is building rapport from the start. Take the time to get to know. We'd been dealing with Germans and Dutch, who are very much more kind of to the point in negotiations, in meetings. But certainly with our dealings, both on East Coast and West Coast and in the North, very, very different from the start. Take the time to get to know who you're dealing with. Transparency is absolutely key as well. Wherever you're dealing, get to the point and clearly articulate your goals and expectations in any meeting and negotiation. Confidence goes without saying. Confidence will get you buy-in. Modesty won't get you far. And be adaptable to regional diversity. We have clients in Washington. Our meetings and negotiations with them are much more direct and fast-paced. They tend to be legal and detail orientated, contrasted with a major client of ours in Colorado, who couldn't be more different, more relaxed, more open to taking time, and much more informal in approach. Leadership is another area just to think about. If you are opening an office, if you're acquiring another company, leadership style needs to be sensitive to two different ways. If you've acquired another company, you'll be well aware of this. But in terms of North America, broadly speaking, there's less hierarchy, very much more focus on teamwork. It's much more egalitarian. Feedback, much more direct in giving, providing feedback and taking constructive criticism, so don't hold back there. Empowering, the leadership approach, I guess, in relation to the UK is quite similar, in the sense of empowering the workforce, enabling them to make independent decisions and to grow independently. I think our main advice here would be, don't forget yourself within the approach to leadership, but definitely encourage awareness and tolerance across your workforce as you're integrating and moving into the States. Final area for consideration is marketing and branding. Quite a sensitive area. It's a huge area. I'm just going to touch on a couple of points here. One is localization. Frank before touched on language. Localization, by that I mean when you're thinking about content and copy, make sure it's culturally relevant. It may seem an obvious thing to say, but if you're referring to a brand or a name or an idiom or a person, make sure that it's relevant to that particular state, and again to understand the reference that you're making. And it can go all the way down to simple things like units of measurements, etc. The US is culturally extremely sensitive across the different regions. I'm going to give you a really broad brush and an extreme example here of an ad campaign that went wrong for a Chinese laundry detergent company going into the US market several years back, called Xiaobi. What they did was launch this commercial where a Chinese woman washes a black man in a washing machine, transforming him into a light-skinned Asian. It bombed across the UK, widely criticised as racist and offensive. Simply, however, highlighting, this is the point I'm making, the importance of cultural sensitivity and understanding racial dynamics in a very diverse country. So just thinking about that. Value propositions I've touched on already. Just make sure you're getting your message right for the individual states or area of the states that you're targeting. Tone and voice is a really important thing with marketing, thinking about some formality, humor. We worked a lot with Jamie Oliver when he expanded his restaurants, various chains, into the States, and found that his very cheeky, chappy, chirpy style simply didn't work. And so we had to work quite closely on the tone and the voice that he was getting across to them. Branding, finally, another one is just to think about the brand, your brand and your product names and any implications for meaning or potential sensitivities behind those names. Again, an extreme example here, and this is involving another language, but it can be the case that your branding and or product names could have another understanding across different regions of the US. This is an example of where Mercedes-Benz launched into China with Benzi. They didn't realize at the time.
Kathy, a little bit short on time, Kathy.
Okay,
You can
All right,
speak.
I'll be 1 minute. I'll be 1 minute. I'm ready done.
Even 56 seconds is fine. Don't
56
worry.
seconds. Okay, no. So Bensi in this case meant Rush to Die, which was not hugely helpful for the branding. They then needed to rebrand. So just think about meaning of brands behind around all of that. Key takeaways from today is do your research, foster a culture of respect, and finally localize your messaging for impact. And I'd be happy to take any questions afterwards. Thank you very much indeed.
Kathy, that was stellar. Thank you so much. Always an extraordinary insightful. I always enjoy hearing what you have to say. And next presenter is Nathaniel Cutler from the Trelli and Associates, the partnership based in Chicago. And Nathaniel, the firm is well known to me, a very competent firm, very iconic in many ways around the UK, supporting British companies who want to go to the States. So in the absence of Tom, which we'll miss today, but Nathaniel, I'm sure you'll step into his shoes admirably. So Nathaniel, over to you, sir.
Thanks so much, Frank. Good to be back. Good to see everybody. I'm happy to participate in this event, which I've done before. So hopefully I can fill in somewhat adequately for Tom, who can't be here today. So as Frank said, we're a law firm, a boutique law firm located in downtown Chicago. We really specialize in helping European companies expand to the US and minimize their legal risk in doing so. We're really a one-stop shop for all of our clients' business legal needs. So it really just runs the spectrum from corporate work to contract work to IP work to litigation. So I like to say we typically do probably 99% of our clients' legal work in the United States. I will. I think there's another slide that lists a few of the bullet points that I will discuss. Thank you very much. Fair warning, I'm not going to touch on all of these. It's a bit much given the time. Plus, with respect to immigration, I will leave that to my colleague Tom Torelli. I suffice to say, it's important to understand if you're going to be employing people in the United States, or if you're going to be sending your people from the UK to the United States to really help expand your business. And if you're doing the latter, it's important to understand what you need to do in terms of immigration, so you're not stopped at the border and returned back to the UK, which is not obviously ideal. But if anyone needs to discuss that further, then of course my colleague Tom Torelli is happy to set up a no-charge phone call and talk to you about that and other things. So with respect to the other matters, I'll touch on a few that are very important, probably the most important legal matters to address early on when you're expanding to the US. So I'll touch on something that Frank said to start, and that is my primary practice area is mergers and acquisitions. I also do a lot of IP work and general commercial contract work. But in terms of mergers and acquisitions, I handle anything from a few $1 million to, a couple of years ago, I did one for 46 million. That involved 5 or 6 countries, not just the United States. So it's important to understand or to think about not just if you're going to expand to the US, but how you're going to do it. There are several different ways you can expand into the United States, and the one I just mentioned is acquiring another company. That's appealing to a lot of UK companies because it's instant access to a US company, to a US sales force, US employees, inventory, and so it's super appealing in that regard. But other ways to enter could be having boots on the ground that you hire, US employees that you hire in the United States, and opening up a physical office yourself in the United States. And then the third one would be, engaging, really not having any boots on the ground here or an office, but engaging engaging other companies as your distributors or resellers or sales agents. So it's really limiting your footprint here, but using, partnering with other companies to expand. Those are the three primary ways. What I'll say is, regardless of which one you choose, it's important to think about, and we normally suggest our clients open a U.S. subsidiary. And some others touched on this already. Having appearing American and that you have a presence here, even if you don't, will go a long way. And one of the ways to do that is to form a U.S. subsidiary, and that way, people see it's an Inc. It's a corporation. It's based in the United States, and you therefore, seemingly have a presence here, even if you really don't. And generally the main reason that we suggest that is not just that, but there's a legal reason, and that is it separates your legal liability in the United States from that in the UK. So, for example, if you have a customer in the United States and something goes wrong with the customer, they're not satisfied with the product, or you don't deliver on time, or they're not satisfied with your services, that dispute would be contained within your U.S. subsidiary. The defendant in any sort of lawsuit would be the U.S. subsidiary. It would not be your UK company. So the legal liability would be essentially contained within the United States, and it would not flow overseas to affect your UK company. So that's a major reason that we normally suggest that for our clients. If you're going to set up a U.S. subsidiary, generally the structure would be that it would be a wholly owned subsidiary of your UK company. So your UK company would be the sole shareholder of the United States company. And there's, sometimes there's differences with that, but the vast majority of subsidiaries that we set up are structured in that fashion. If you're going to have a U.S. subsidiary, it's super important to not just let it sit there. You need to actually use it to take advantage of separating that legal liability. So you need to run your invoicing through it. You need to have its own bank account to receive payments for services or goods rendered. You need to have that subsidiary be party to your U.S. contracts, not your UK company. So everything that is possible to run through the U.S. company should be run through the U.S. company. Otherwise, there's no point in setting it up. So so that is something that we recommend as well. So you can set up an LLC or a C Corp. There are some other types of legal entities that you can consider, but those are the primary two. They both serve the same purpose of limiting the liability of shareholders and directors. So there's no difference in that regard, but there's a difference in terms of taxes, which I won't get into because I'm not a tax attorney, but very generally speaking, taxes flow through an LLC and subject its shareholders to taxes. That's not really ideal in many circumstances for UK companies that don't want to be subject to taxes here. The other one is a C Corp, and the tax liability does not flow through, generally speaking, a C Corp. The taxes stop at the corporate level, at the United States legal entity level, and doesn't flow through to the shareholders. So I urge you to speak with your tax consultants about which one is right for you, but that's the general difference. You may have heard Delaware being the place to incorporate your U.S. subsidiary. It is very popular. I think that originated probably from a tax standpoint, with Delaware having some favorable tax laws versus other states, but I don't think that's so much anymore. but because it was such a popular destination for incorporating the United States, there are now some other reasons to incorporate there. It has a very well thought out corporate code, and that's what's going to generally govern how your U.S. company operates. It's got an efficient Secretary of State. You can file things very quickly and easily with the Secretary of State. And now it has, because of all of the disputes involving Delaware companies, because so many companies are incorporated there, it has a very knowledgeable judicial system. So for those reasons and others, a lot of people flock to Delaware to incorporate. Just because you have a Delaware company does not mean you have to have a physical office there. In most cases, our clients do not have any physical offices in Delaware. They have their physical offices, if at all, in any other state in the United States. So you really can just exist there on paper. And if you want to set up a physical office in Chicago, for example, where we're located, then you can do that. The barriers to entry in terms of forming a U.S. subsidiary are not nearly what people imagine. If we do it on an expedited basis, we can form a U.S. subsidiary for you within 24 to 48 hours and secure a tax ID number as well very quickly. So, the states in the United States like to make their money, and the way that they can make their money is make it easy for companies to incorporate there. So it's actually quite easy and efficient to form a U.S. subsidiary. So that can be done very quickly. I think that's about it with respect to the corporate issue. I'll move on to contracts. So with respect to contracts, I urge you, do not presume that your UK contract is going to be enforceable in the United States. And in many respects, it will not be. And not only will certain provisions not be enforceable, but other ones that are enforceable, you don't want to be enforced. And I'll give you some examples of that. So if you're using a UK contract with your UK company, then there's one of two ways that we can handle it. We can take a look at it and either tweak it here or there to adapt it to the United States. But if it's in not great condition, we may just have to scrap it and start from scratch. But we can certainly let you know which one would be more cost efficient for you. But with respect to enforceability, I see a lot of provisions in my UK clients' contracts that say if they're selling goods that say that title to the goods will not change even though the products have been delivered to the customer. And that's not something that's generally enforceable in the United States. In the United States, you don't retain title, you retain a lien on those products, but you do not retain title. And that's just one of the myriad examples of provisions that are not enforceable. Provisions that are probably enforceable, but that you do not want to be enforced, and this may seem counterintuitive, but a lot of my UK clients have contracts they use in the US that have governing law being England, and have a exclusive jurisdiction selection in case of a dispute in England. And I'll tell you, I understand why my clients do that. They think they're protecting themselves, and it's going to be very difficult for the US customer to assert legal claims in a lawsuit if they have to do it in England. But think about it on the flip side. If you have a dispute with a customer who's not paying and you need to file a lawsuit, you have to do it in England. And then you get an English judgment. Well, where are the assets of your customer? They're not in England. So you have a piece of paper that says you have a judgment for, let's say, $100,000. How are you going to enforce it? You can come here to the United States and ask a state court to recognize or domesticate that judgment, but each state has its own laws with respect to recognizing foreign judgments, and you don't know that it's going to, you're going to satisfy those elements that are required for a U.S. court to recognize a foreign judgment. So typically, I recommend a U.S. state law applying and the exclusive jurisdiction being in a U.S. state. Sometimes I also see contracts that say that the governing law is England, and the place for exclusive jurisdiction is Illinois. But in that case, you've got Illinois judges trying to figure out what English law is, and I've dealt with that too. And you need to spend a lot of time and money convincing or proving to a judge what English law is, because they have absolutely zero idea. So that's going to ratchet up your costs in litigation if you have that sort of provision or provisions in your contract. So these are all things to think about in terms of using contracts and what you need to do to have quality U.S. contracts. And I do highly recommend having them rather than just doing things on a handshake or invoices, because if there is a dispute, then you can show a judge, if it goes to court, you can show a judge what each side's obligations were. And you don't have to have a situation where it's he said, she said, and the judge is making a determination based on who's the more credible witness. I'm sure everyone here would be a very credible witness, but you don't know what a judge is going to think, who's more credible, and you don't want it to come down to that. So it's nice to have something in writing that you can just point to a judge and argue, this is what they should have done, and they didn't do it. So
Nathaniel, could you get to wrap it up in a minute or so? Would you be able to doing that?
Yep, for sure. And the last, actually, it's good timing. The last point I wanted to make was with respect to intellectual property. So in the United States, intellectual property generally falls into 4 categories: patent, trademark, copyright, and trade secret. It's super important to think about protecting those as early as possible. What you want to avoid is a situation where you're spending all of your time and money in building your brand and brand awareness in the United States, and then 2 years down the road, you get a cease and desist letter because you're infringing on some other company's IP. Now you have to rebrand, you have to rethink your product, you have to cease selling your product. So you definitely don't want to put yourself in that situation. So think early about what your intellectual property is and how to protect it. And I'll leave it at that.
Nathaniel, thank you for being so accommodating. It was very crisply done and well done too. Thank you so much again. Thank you for being with us. Lovely to see you again, Nathaniel.
You too. Thanks so much.
It gives a great pleasure to introduce David Patton. David is the tax partner with Fraser Dieter, based in the States. We haven't worked together, but David very kindly stepped up to the plate to help us out on this webinar, and I'm very, very, very thankful for both David and Tom as well as his support in bringing the firm to our meeting today. So thank you, David. Without more ado, would you like to kick off?
Sorry, guys. I'll dive in. I don't know what. I'm sorry. If I say I don't know what David is, I shall let David carry on.
Sorry about that. I got given control of the screen, and then I couldn't find the unmute buttons after that.
Don't worry, I've muted myself twice today unwittingly, so don't. You're in good company.
Yeah. Well, Tom. Yeah. So I'm David Patton. I'm a U.S. tax partner. I'm based in not so beautiful Atlanta, Georgia today. But I've worked with Fraser Dieter now for 13 years, and PwC before that. And I've got my colleague on here, Thomas Wells. Tom, do you want to give a quick intro for the firm and everything?
Yeah, sure. So hi guys, I'm Thomas Wells. I'm based out of our London office and one of the UK tax senior managers, specialising predominantly in R&D tax relief. Fraser and Dieter, then by trade, we're a US-based accountancy firm. Been established in Atlanta for getting on 45 years now. We've got offices across 6 or 7 offices across the northern part of the US and cover the whole of North America. And are just breaching the 40th biggest accountancy firm in terms of size in the US. In 2018, 2019, we sort of realized there was a really big disconnect in how SMEs in particular could access good advice from a tax and compliance point of view in entering the US marketplace. It was controlled sort of predominantly by big 4, even sort of top 8 firms in the UK. And they all work via a fairly typical network structure where, while it's quite complex, the ownership of the UK and US firm are not the same, and they don't therefore have the same priorities. And we recognise that there would be a better way in helping ambitious technology, life science, but also general trading companies get set up in the US. So the Fraser and Dieter model is actually quite unique and interesting in the accounting world, in that the UK firm is a wholly owned subsidiary of the US company. And that really brings with it a host of benefits, not least the fact that everyone in the firm is tied to the success of a relationship and making sure that you are looked after and cared for on both sides of the Atlantic. As a company, both firms are now full service, so we can do in the US everything from one-man band in his mum's basement all the way through to auditing listed and publicly traded company accounts. And in the UK, again, we've got everything from pre-revenue scale-ups through to the subsidiaries of some of our largest listed companies in the US. So there really is sort of a one-stop shop. And so just sort of carry that over the last 3 years, 4 years since we've been trading properly in the UK, we've helped more than 300 companies establish a credible US structure and get compliant from a tax point of view. So it's something now that we're getting a real track record and supporting. But I'll hand over to David. David's going to talk to you about some simple tax stuff in the US, some state and local taxes, and then a little bit about transfer pricing.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And so I'm going to kind of, a lot of these slides that I've got here also kind of cover some of the stuff that Mr. Cutler just covered and some of the other speakers here today. So I may kind of be blowing through these things. If I forget to say it at the end here, I think that one of the most important things is we're going to give a high-level overview of a lot of different topics. And the answer to a lot of the questions of how do I need to do this or what needs to happen is it depends. And so I would tell you to that some of the best money that you'll ever spend is on getting it right on the front end and engaging with your kind of professional services providers in these various areas. I mean, you want to make sure that you're getting off to the right foot. So just kind of going through a couple of these different areas. Let's see. For some reason, I think these slides may be a little out of order. Let's see. Sorry about this, guys. Let me try a different. No, they're just out of order. So that's I'm sure that's on me. So really, just kind of broadly, what I would say is that when you're setting up in the States, what you really want to do is kind of determine, you want to determine why it is that you're doing this. So are you doing it for the purpose of kind of planting your flag and becoming a U.S. company and saying that, hey, we're here and we're in business? And are you trying to set it up like Mr. Cutler was saying with U.S. contracts? Do you want to sell out of your U.S. entity? Do you want, are you looking to hire employees? You've heard the term a couple of times here of, do you want boots on the ground? And so if you want boots on the ground, you definitely need to have that through a U.S. company. Is this something where you want to send employees over to the States? Do you want somebody from your UK home office to come over here and kind of export the culture of your company? Do you want that person to be the one who's kind of the face of the company here in the States? The other thing too that you need to consider is, are you thinking that you eventually want to take on some US money? Is maybe the next round of funding that you want, is that going to come through a predominantly US investor pool? So as I was saying before, like, a lot of the functionality of this is really going to depend on what you want your model to be. So with that, I think step one is in what has previously been talked about, is probably determining the entity type. All right, so if you want to do business through the U.S. And do that through a U.S. sub. So let's say that in this scenario, what you want is, you want to start hiring employees that are going to help to generate sales. If that is the case, then what you would be thinking is that you want to create this U.S. C corporation, and it's probably going to be wholly owned. When you form that entity through your legal team, the types of things that you're going to run into are, okay, well, we need to be able to pay these employees. And in order to pay the employees, we got to have a payroll processor. And the payroll processor is going to require that you have this employer identification number. And you got to have this bank account that's linked to the payroll processing, and to be able to receive money, and also close contracts and things like that. And so that is also going to require an EIN. And so really kind of the first couple of steps here are after the incorporation documents are formed, and you form the U.S. entity. The next step really is to try and obtain the U.S. tax ID, and then move forward from there. As you're thinking about kind of tax efficient structures, you kind of hear about things like loopholes, or maybe one structure may be a little bit more tax efficient than another. I know that we've also mentioned on the call previously about LLCs versus C corporations, and one of those is a flow through type of entity. A lot of that is really going to be governed by what we have between the UK and the US, which is a double tax treaty. And that double tax treaty kind of it goes out and says, between the U.S. company, or between the U.S. government and the U.K. government, which entity is going to be able to tax different profits. And so from that perspective, what you have is a contract, like I said, between the two U.S. governments, but it's not necessarily between the state governments and the UK government. And so one of the slides here previous is like you're dealing with 50 different countries rather than just one country. So we have all these different laws in these 50 different states. And so what may be regarded by the US company, or by the US government and the UK government, may not be regarded by each of the individual US states. I think the next slide in here kind of talks about SALT issues. So SALT is kind of an abbreviation for state and local tax. So when I'm thinking about state and local tax, this really comes down to two different things. It's an income tax is the predominant way for this, and then there's also a sales tax. And that sales tax, it can be levied on mostly just goods, mostly just kind of tangible property that's sent into the states for sale. But also now increasingly more, some of the states are taxing software as a service as well. And so, that may be subject to sales tax. Those sales taxes are something kind of akin to a VAT tax, a value added tax, except for this is something that's levied on the end user rather than specifically on different levels throughout the supply chain. This is not something where you would this is not something where you would reclaim the different taxes and throughout the supply chain. It's really just something where all the end users that are going to be paying this, they're all kind of familiar with paying something like this. So it's not something that's going to be new to them. One of the things that's very important, though, is that you get that right from the front end. So even if you're selling from your UK company into the US, what you may end up having is some sort of a sales tax liability, even though you're not physically located here and doing business through the U.S. company. So as Mr. Cutler was saying earlier too, if you've got these UK contracts coming into the States, you may have this kind of what they would call an economic presence here in the States. And that economic presence could be taxable from a state tax perspective. So that's one of the things that you want to pay attention to. Here in the States too, you've got this income tax that is levied across probably about 48 of the 50 states, and through that, what they do is they take a portion of your kind of U.S. taxable income and determine where it is that they're going to be able to tax that from an income perspective. So it's something that's levied on your kind of your net profit. Again, with all of these items, I would say that it's facts and circumstances specific, and that you should talk to your advisor about this as you start to enter into these types of contracts or hire employees in these different states. Again, one of the key concepts of this is kind of boots on the ground in these particular areas. And then just kind of briefly too, with the remaining time, I'll talk quickly about transfer pricing. So from a transfer pricing perspective, I know that this is more of a European concept, or that people in Europe are more familiar with this, but doing business between the two different countries, between two different jurisdictions, is something where each of the governments is going to be looking to make sure that they're being able to tax their specific portion of the taxable items. And so what you're looking at is, even though it may be two companies that are owned by the same ownership group, from a transfer pricing perspective, you got to look at it as if it's two independent third parties. And so, like in a scenario where if you've got only sales guys here in the States, if those sales guys are selling kind of the intellectual property use of something that was developed back in the UK, should they recognize the full profit here in the US? Should they recognize no profit here in the US? Or should it be somewhere kind of in between that? And so a transfer pricing exercise kind of helps to document those types of items. It looks like I may be kind of running out of time here too. But again, I would just emphasize that as you're looking at this, it is always facts and circumstances specific, and it's very important to get off on the right foot.
David, on that note, that was very much on the right foot. Thank you so much. Hopefully you're open to taking approaches to you from anyone in the audience who wants a complimentary consultation just to get the ball rolling. Am I going too far? Would that be agreeable?
Oh no, that'd be great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, not at all. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Thomas. Much more to come. It looks like that could be a topic for an entire separate session, but it gives me great pleasure to introduce Amanda Bruni, Business Development Manager for Cardinal Logistics. And we'll talk about best practice for freight forwarding from the UK to the United States. So, Mandy or Amanda, the floor is yours, please, if you'd be so kind.
Thank you, Frank. So thank you to all the speakers so far. So I'm Amanda. I work for Cardinal Global Logistics. We're the largest employee-owned freight forwarder in the world. And we've got offices globally as well. So a great network to help guide our customers for getting their shipments from A to B. So next slide, please. So the first thing, and I'll mirror David's comments there, that, do your homework before you actually move your goods out of the UK. So in front of you, you'll see the Incoterms that are widely recognised throughout the world, and these help establish both the cost and the risk from the buyer to the seller. Okay. Now, in my experience, DDP is widely used when moving goods to the US. You will find over time that, you know, the US buyer doesn't really want any involvement in the movement of the shipment, nor do they want involvement of paying the duties and the taxes. Obviously, that can be quite a costly thing when it comes to paying duties and taxes in another country. So speak to your freight forwarder. A good freight forwarder will be able to give you all those costs up front, and they're obviously dictated by the commodity code, which we'll move on to shortly. Next slide, please. So obviously export documentation is very, very important. Okay, so it plays a vital role and it facilitates a smooth flow of goods and payments from your buyer and the movement of your shipments. Okay, so there's a lots of key information on there that really need to be visible on your commercial invoice. One thing that I do notice quite a lot is that we've all heard of UORI numbers, because in the UK we all need those to move goods out of the UK. But one thing a lot of people miss off is the tax ID numbers in the US. So even on a shipment that you're moving on a DDP term, where you will be the importer of record in the US, on a US customs entry, the ultimate consignee still needs to be shown and identified on that. So it's good to get all those pieces of information before you start moving your goods, because if it gets to the US and there's some key pieces of information missing, then it will halt your shipment and in turn cost you money, depending on the Incoterm again that you're using. So there's some other key points on there. Commodity codes, which sometimes can be referred to as tariff codes, HS codes, HTS codes. And again, we're going to speak about those in a little bit more detail, but they will determine the level of duty paid on those products. So again, if you're shipping under terms DDP, that will fall on your shoulders. So it's imperative that you make sure that you've got the correct code there. And again, CPC codes, you know, what are you doing with those goods? CPC codes lets customs know what are you doing with those products. Are you sending into the US as a sale? Are you sending into the US as a repair or some work being done on them, and then they're going to be returned to the UK? So again, an important piece of information. And again, it helps the smooth transaction of the goods through the customs systems, both here in the UK and the USA. And bond numbers, again, we'll come back to that a little bit later, but if you do have a US bond in place, then it's important that that bond number is shown on your invoice as well. So there's some other key pieces of information and documents. So packing lists are important. Certificates of origin, not tend to be needed for the US. You know, I think in my 20 years of working in freight forwarding, I think I've been asked for one once, but sometimes, you know, make sure you speak to your buyer about that. What do they need from you? So that's equally important. And dangerous goods notes. So if your goods are classified as hazardous by air or by sea, your freight forwarder will need to know that at the time of inquiry, and they'll also need copies of the MSDS sheet. But to move the goods, we will need the dangerous goods note as well. Okay, next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, HS codes, commodity codes, tariff codes, whichever they are dictated. So they are globally recognized means of identifying your products for both import and export. Okay, so it's important that at the destination country, because these dictate the import duty rates, they can also dictate import VAT rates. So some goods coming into the UK particular can be zero rated in VAT. Export commodity codes are only 8 digits, but import codes are 10. So again, you know, make sure you look into those codes and you establish those correctly. But one most important thing that I need to point out is most UK and US codes don't match. So codes are supposed to be universal, but unfortunately, they're not always. So it's imperative that you check out those codes, make sure that you will identify your goods correctly within those codes. And I put a couple of links on there as well, because I'm not sure if the slides are shown afterwards, of both of those systems. So the UK tariff, trade tariff, and the US harmonized trade tariff schedule. Okay, next slide, please. So again, we looked at, obviously, just bear with me a second. some of my screen is being taken over by the camera. Okay, so import duty and import taxes. Okay, so it works a little bit differently in the US for import taxes, but firstly duty. Okay, so import duty is dictated by the US HTS code. So again, very important that gets established, and particularly equally important under DDP terms, because you will have to pay those duty costs. Import taxes work a little bit differently in the US, so there's no VAT system as such, so it works not on the 20% rate that we have in the UK, which is good news, a little bit less. But there are two types. Okay, so merchandising processing fee, which is known as MPF, it's applicable to both air and sea shipments. So obviously there is a minimum charge and a maximum charge for an MPF. So again, you know, a good freight forwarder will be able to help you establish the costs that would be involved in that. A harbour maintenance fee, so this is only applicable to sea freight shipments, and there's currently no minimum or maximum charge on that. So that is actually rated at 0.125% of your commercial invoice value. So again, look at the values, look at what, you know, the taxes you think would be applicable. And again, a good freight forwarder would be able to help you establish what those are. So there's no hidden charges when your goods do arrive in the USA. Next slide, please. So I touched on the bond fees before, and obviously, you know, again, under DDP only, you would be responsible for the bond fees. So this regulates and ensures that all duties and fees associated with the rules and regulations of importing goods are paid. Okay, so a little bit like an insurance policy, if you will. So make sure that you're paying the correct amount of duty and taxes in the US. And again, in the States, they can go back like HMRC, you know, 7 years to make sure that companies are paying that correct amount. So there's two separate types of bonds in the US. So one's a single entry bond. So this is used as a transactional bond and can only be used up to 4 times a year. So if you are looking to import on a regular basis, then a single entry bond isn't the one for yourselves. Now that's currently charged at $5.50 per $1,000 of invoice value. So again, you know, it might not be suitable for you if your goods are high values. Okay. There's also a continuous bond. So as the name suggests, this bond covers shipments on a continuous and ongoing basis within a 12-month period. Current cost for a bond, a US annual bond or US customs continuous bond would be around $700. So again, this is something that your freight forwarder can arrange for you and speak to them about which one, and they would give the advice to be true and correct depending on the volumes and the values of your shipments going in. Okay, next slide, please. So packing, again, you know, you must make sure that your goods are packed suitable for export, not only for the type of goods, but also from an insurance point of view. So if you do insure your goods, one point that will be made clear on your insurance policy, where are the goods suitably packed? The USA is also regulated by ISPM 15, which means that all wood packaging needs to be heat treated. So that doesn't include man-made goods like plywood, etc. So again, you know, make sure that any pallets or any crates that you're shipping out to the States are visibly, you know, stamped with the ISPM 15 stamp. Okay.
Amanda, could you sort of bring it to a close in a couple of minutes?
Would
that be all right?
Yes, that's it. That's fine. So that's me, John.
Oh, you really? That was
Yes, right on time, Frank.
Really? All right. Well, I'm fine for.
I've been practicing.
Thank you, Amanda. That was great. It's a lot of detail for a lot of detail. Of course, you're open to take questions outside.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I'm delighted to. We've got a double presentation here. We've got Andrew Finch, Trade Partnerships Manager. We'll talk about the essential role of the Department for Business and Trade. Also with Leah Collihoff, who's the Select USA representative in London, the commercial section in the embassy. And they're going to tag team to the close. So, Andrew, if you'd like to go first, that'll be super.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Frank. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Finch, Trade Partnerships Manager for the Department for Business and Trade, which is the UK Government Department for Economic Growth. I'm just going to talk I'm just going to try and control my slides first of all. That would be helpful, wouldn't it?
You're on mute, Andrew.
You can tell that I don't use Zoom very often, can't you? Apologies for that. Yeah, I'm just going to talk very quickly this afternoon about how the Department for Business and Trade can help UK SMEs export their goods and services, and all that within the context of the US. So essentially, we support businesses to invest, grow, and export, and we do that through a range of targeted interventions. Okay, so you probably saw at the beginning my patch covers South Yorkshire as one of the regions that I'm responsible for. In South Yorkshire, we've got a team of 9 international trade advisors that work out in the field with SMEs, together with myself. We do a lot of work with local stakeholders such as the Chamber of Commerce, the Mayoral Combined Authority. We also work with commercial partners in terms of running events and missions. We're also plugged into local, national and international networks. So here's just a brief summary of the whole support that we offer from the department. So it goes from a digital offer right through to the support of international trade advisors, through to overseas network colleagues as well. So the first, the one-stop shop really is the Export Digital Inquiry Service. So this is open to all sectors and business sizes. You can access via the link shown at the bottom of the screen there. So essentially, for any questions, any general questions that you have as an SME looking to export, that's a good first port of call really to start engagement with the department. We also have a flagship offering. Again, it's a digital offering, which is called the UK Export Academy. This is a free online training program. It's aimed at companies that are new to exporting, but also to existing exporters. And we have an essential series, a masterclass series, and also programs covering sector and market events. And you can see that we had a recent event which looked at government procurement in the US and how it works and how a UK SME can succeed. Moving on to international trade advisors. So as I mentioned, I've got around 9 colleagues working across the patch in South Yorkshire. These colleagues provide key account management services for companies. They very often come with commercial backgrounds. They work alongside e-commerce advisors as well. They do tend to focus on what we call high export potential companies. So essentially, this is a company with a minimum turnover of £500,000 and that has an existing product or service that is exportable in theory. Access to an international trade advisor is subject to a DBT triage process. So depending where you are on the exporting journey, will depend on whether we suggest that you start with the digital offer before engaging with one of our international trade advisors. We also run a series of trade missions and events. So we do a lot of events locally, as I mentioned, working with local partners. We also have a trade mission program as well. It's worth speaking with a local business advisor in terms of any funding that might be available to support you on a trade mission. If you look at what's called the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, depending where you are in the UK, some local authorities are using some of that funding to offer grants to support companies exhibiting or attending trade shows. This is one example that we did recently. So the WIN program, which is the Women's International Network. So a group of female-led companies, we took them on a trade mission to Indianapolis and Chicago recently in March. Really successful event, enabled colleagues from the UK to engage with their US counterparts. This project or program has been piloted across the northern region of England, and as I understand it, it's going to go nationwide in the future. So it's a great program to engage with. Looking at our international market service, so essentially DBT, we've got teams located in the British Embassy in Washington, DC, and across 8 British consulates across the US. But in addition to that, we've got an international market service that we can provide as well. Primarily the SME, the company needs to be working with an international trade advisor who will connect them with the international markets team. And we've got a team obviously located looking after the North American regions as well. And they can provide bespoke in-market support, and they can also provide access to a vetted network of private sector providers. So just to give you some context, I thought it'd be useful to focus on South Yorkshire. I think Nick gave a few statistics at the start of the webinar today, but you can see that for South Yorkshire, the US is the lead country for both goods and services exports from the region. And you can see the numbers there quoted Yorkshire and Humber as a whole as a region, and also from a South Yorkshire perspective. So South Yorkshire, we're looking at Sheffield, Barnsley, Rotherham and Doncaster primarily. And in terms of growing trade with the US, so DBT as a government department, we're looking to work collaboratively with regional partners as well. So, for example, we have the US trade envoy. He's due to meet the mayor of South Yorkshire in April, looking at how SMEs and colleagues across South Yorkshire can look to engage more proactively with US states, for example. We at DBT, we're looking to run what we call a place-based strategy across South Yorkshire as well. So that will involve working much more closely with partners on the ground regionally and aligning what we do with what's happening in terms of local economic priorities, for example. And if you look at the Mayoral Combined Authority across South Yorkshire, they're developing a trade and export plan, and the US has been identified as a core market with opportunities across trade, investment and innovation. Mike previously obviously did a great presentation on Pittsburgh there. As he mentioned, Pittsburgh is twinned with Sheffield, the steel cities. And I know that colleagues at Sheffield City Council, they're looking to enhance their engagement with Pittsburgh going forwards as well, which is great. And just a brief mention as well about the recent MOUs, stroke trade pacts that the UK government has signed with various US states to date. To date, we've signed 8 of these agreements. So you can see there that the individual states concerned, and also highlighted the priority areas for cooperation. So if you're a UK company operating in these areas, and again, looking at South Yorkshire, there's some really good matches there. These MOUs can help facilitate trade and collaboration with our US counterparts. And you can see the other states there. The most recent one that we signed was with Texas. As you all no doubt know, Texas is the second largest US state economy, and it's the UK's most economically significant trade pact that we've signed to date with the US state. Finally, from me, again, from the Department for Business and Trade, we've got a range of country fact sheets, including one for the US. So, for example, if you're looking to establish a business presence in the US, working with in-market partners, shipping products, US customs procedures, taxes, US regulations and standards, all the kind of general information is included there. And that's everything from me today. So there are my contact details. Very happy to engage with anybody that's keen to find out more how the Department for Business and Trade can assist your companies with exporting to the US. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was terrific. And of course, you're on the ground there, so people can reach out to you and meet you and have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and take the conversation forward.
Yeah, sure.
It gives me a great pleasure to introduce Leah. Leah, you've been very patient. Hopefully everything is good for you, but we look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you, Frank.
I'll hand over the baton to you, if I may.
All right, super. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be online with you. Again, my name is Leah Kohlhoff, and I work for the Department of Commerce here at the U.S. Embassy. You just heard from Andrew how the DBT can help UK businesses export to the United States. Our role here at the embassy is sort of to take those businesses one step further. Let me tell you about my fictional friend, Terry. So Terry has a UK business and they make really cool refrigerators, and they're selling successfully pretty much to all 67 million people here in the UK. They contact Paul and his group at the DBT, and Paul helps them grow their business by exporting to the United States, mainly because the US has 336 million consumers that they can tap into. So DBT, well, further to that, not only do we have 336 million people, but just like the UK, we share similar values, we have a similar culture, and as it turns out, we both like cold food, and we speak the same language. So DBT helps Terry with all of the steps needed to ship the refrigerators to a US distributor and to support B2B sales. After successfully tackling the US market, Terry decides that they still have growth aspirations and they want to start up a refrigeration manufacturing location in the United States with retail shops. So that's where my job comes in. We are the Select USA team. We can help Terry understand where and how to set up their business. In the first instance, we can produce very in-depth research to explore factors like workforce availability, cost of labor, retail and electricity costs. We can also help define what some of the industry clusters look like, especially relative to the transportation and the supply chain. Next, we're really good at linking Terry to other peers in the US market to share knowledge and experience. But most importantly, we can introduce Terry to the state and regional economic development offices. We heard earlier from Mike Henderson in Pittsburgh. So we can introduce Terry to the Mike Hendersons of the United States. And they can take him through how to do business in their state, learn about any tax credits, grants, or incentives they can offer. And then finally, we can help Terry find service providers to help with setting up a US entity, understand the tax laws and the labor constraints and contracts. And really, what makes this extremely valuable is that we have excellent links to other US government agencies that can help with permits and patents and necessary regulations for setting up. Of course, not every business will look like Terry's. We support medtech, fintech, businesses within the energy and defense sectors. So if you want to set up a US entity, we can help you get through those steps. Plus, in addition, once you're in the United States, you then have access to additional country markets through our 14 free trade agreements. I just want to mention that we do have some excellent resources online that can help you navigate things like the state business incentives, workforce data analysis. We have, a multitude of industry snapshots and FDI statistics. Those can all be found on our trade.gov Select USA website. And finally, I just want to leave you with one more big piece of information. If you are at that stage where you're ready to set up in the United States, we have our flagship event called the Select USA Investment Summit. This year, it's going to be held June 23rd through 26th, just outside Washington, D.C. The Investment Summit can help you do all of the things that I've just talked about, but it all happens under one roof. All 50 states and territories, lots of cities will be there represented at the summit. We'll have various government agencies that you can meet with. And then, of course, we have lots of sessions to help you understand how to set up in the United States. But the real value is the networking. So please feel free to reach out to myself. Here's my information. Of course, you can reach out to Frank, the Blue Ink team, or the Sheffield Department of Commerce if you'd like to connect with me. So thank you.
I thank you, Leah. That was terrific, and it was you were icing on the cake. A lot of content today, but it was a real pleasure hearing what you had to say. And thank you for being patient. We've actually had a very solid number of participants. We haven't had many people drift off, even though we've been going for quite some time. But thank you, Leah. It was very kind of you. I did enjoy that. And I underscore that Select USA event in Washington D.C. if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it's National Harbor, just across the bridge from D.C.
Yeah.
National Harbor, Maryland, that is.
Well, Nick, I'm going to hand over to you, sir, for the Q&A. Thank you, Nick, for your hospitality. I'll close on my session now, but thank you for your hospitality at the chamber, and thank you everybody for participating and speaking so eloquently and so congruently. So, Nick, it's the floor is yours for the Q&A, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Frank, and thank you to all the contributors. That was really very interesting. So we do have an opportunity for anybody to ask questions now if they wish. And as I say, you can either put them in the chat, or if you're feeling a bit bold, you can put your camera on and your microphone and ask the question on the air. So do we have any questions to begin with?
We have a number. We have a number, Nick.
Go on then, Frank. I can't see them.
Ah, it's
I can't actually see any questions in the chat there.
It's interesting. I had 7. They were
technically. Oh, well, do you want to read them out then, Frank?
Well, I can't access them either. For some reason, I've got a glitch here.
Oh dear.
Stacey, can you help at all? Stacey?
I can't see any. I can see that there's been comments in the chat, but they're from Nick and Thomas, just with some details on there. So I can't see any questions that are being put in the chat.
You can't either. I thought there was one from Tom Wells of Praise Adita about for Amanda. I don't know. Was I misreading that?
He has put some information there. He's put an article in and his contact details.
Yeah, they're not questions, Frank. They're just highlighting to various links.
Frank, I did ask a question. I sent it to you personally because I thought it was being moderated by you. But yeah, it's only when I was talking to another contact of mine and I thought it might be useful. Amanda, can you give any explanation or provide any sort of context on the benefit of CT-PAT registration for US customs and imports? Is that something that you manage? Have you seen it? Does it make a big difference or not?
CT-PAT is kind of the US equivalent to IAEO. So yeah, it would have some benefits with the US customs system. And certainly, you know, if you are going to establish yourself in the US and you are regularly shipping to from the UK to the US, yeah, I do see a benefit there. You know, same as the AEO in the UK, it helps facilitate the smoothing of the customs formalities in the States. So yeah, certainly benefit. I don't know anyone in the US that would, you know, help a company accomplish that. But certainly, I'm sure that, you know, with a bit of digging, I could find someone that looks after that. Yes.
I do know someone, but it was only out of interest for UK companies. If they're AEO registered, is it worth having CT-PAT too?
Yes, it is. You can still trade there, you know, and quite well. You know, we don't see many, you know, shipments coming up for stoppages and things like that in the States. Yeah, there is customs inspections from time to time, like there is here in the UK. But yeah, I think, you know, if you want to really establish yourself there, and you have AEO here in the UK, I think it would be beneficial to them to have CT-PAT, but certainly it's not essential.
The thing is about CT-PAT, Amanda, is that you know, US customs can be difficult to get goods through. And if you do have CT-PAT, if you are shipping a lot of stuff to the States, CT-PAT will certainly help with the smoothness of the goods going through customs there, because it is a trusted trader mark.
Of course.
I just wonder, Nick, while we're actually got a little bit of time to spare, which is our good fortune today, whether anybody who spoke already would like to add any other comments. I mean, Mike Henderson, Kathy, David, Nathaniel, anybody would like to add any additional comments? Or we've got 5 or 10 minutes to spare, or we can wrap it up a little bit early. Anybody would like to chip in or come back on?
We do have a question from Steve Townsley, Frank. Steve is one of our trainers, and he does an international qualification known as ITOPS, International Trade Operations and Procedures. So, Mandy, Steve's, I don't know if you can see that, but Steve's quote, I know you know Steve, so
Yeah.
given the different commodity code numbers for US and UK products, should UK exporters show them both on their export invoice? Would it cause problems if they did?
Yeah, so my advice is always show both of them. So if they are different in the UK and the US, clearly identify that on the invoice. So the UK export commodity code and obviously the code after that, and the US import commodity code, and show the code there. Because again, you know, if you are only going to show one and the different, obviously in the UK we all know that the commodity codes are used for statistical purposes, but but they need that. We need that as a freight forwarder to obviously complete the export entry. But when it gets into the US, if the customs guy in the US or the broker that's doing the entry and the code isn't on there and it's different, you know, to the UK code, it can cause issues. You know, I have seen in the past where, you know, just recently actually, some steel products that moved from the UK to the US code was different. The broker decided to use a code that wasn't correct, and it was under quota, so they end up having to pay $20,000 of import duty. Obviously we can get that amended, but it does take some time to do that. So yeah, my advice is always show both, but obviously clearly identify those on the invoice.
Thank you, Amanda.
Okay, so it doesn't look like there are any more questions. Oh, hang on a minute. I've got one from Stephen Markham. What FINRA, F-I-N-R-A qualifications would fundraising sales staff need in the USA if raising our own developments? So that question is for anybody who think they can answer it, and it is in the chat if you'd like to read it.
Leah, would you, David or Leah, would you be able to, sounds like a finance question and finance and US specific question. Would either of you like to have a shot at that? Read out again, Nick.
Yeah, so what FINRA, F-I-N-R-A qualifications would fundraising sales staff need in the USA if raising for our own developments? So interesting.
Or maybe Nathaniel will have a view on that. It sounds like quasi-legal as well.
I think that we may have to look into that one and get back to Stephen. I'll make a note.
All right.
I know in the UK you don't have to have a qualification, but I know in America, if you're a third-party placement agent raising for other companies, you have to have qualifications. But whether you have to for your own company, just raising for yourself, I don't know. Presumably, you still would have to be registered with FINRA. So,
right, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Frank. I'm not knowledgeable enough to opine on that issue. But if you send me the email question, or maybe I can just take a photo of it here, I'm happy to ask one of my colleagues.
That would be great, Nathaniel, if you could answer that. And if you want to answer to me, I think you've got my details. I put them in the chat, then I can get them back to Stephen.
Great. All right. I'll do my best. I can't promise anything.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Thanks, Nathaniel.
No problem.
Cool. Can I thank Stacey, Andrew, and your good self, Nick, again for hosting the Sheffield International Trade under the auspices of the Sheffield International Trade body. This very, very rich in content event. Thank you so much, Nick and Stacey and Andrew.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along to this. Now, are we sharing the slides, Frank, so that all participants can have a deck?
Well, absolutely. I'm very happy to share my slides. I'd be pleased to. And of course, if folks want to come back to me particularly and ask questions about anything or everything and help them connect with the right experts, which is all about making connections with the experts today. I think as David Patton said, get off on the right foot is very important with all of this, not on the wrong foot. Otherwise, it can be a very costly exercise, as indeed Nathaniel mentioned also in his presentation. So short answer, yes. If anybody has any reservations, they should probably let you know privately, Nick, about sharing.
Yeah, yeah, That's great. So we will be sharing the slides, and from my side, on behalf of Sheffield Chamber and the International Trade Centre, I'd like to thank you, Frank, for organising this, and for everybody who has been presenting. You know, it is really important to make the right moves when you're sending stuff out or starting in the USA. And the links of the people who have been presenting today are invaluable. And I would say to any of the delegates who are listening, once you get the slide decks, please, you know, if you've got questions, ask the right person who gave a specific presentation. And with that, I think we will close it and wish you all a very happy rest of the day.
Thank you, Nick.